Behind closed doors, the horrible truth of a family's legacy. In the forgotten heart of Texas, behind the iron gates of one of the most feared prisons in America, a young woman was about to uncover a truth so devastating it would tear her entire life apart. A single letter, a forbidden name, and a past buried so deep no one dared to speak of it. What she thought would be a simple interview would awaken a nightmare decades in the making. Stay with us, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? This is a story you will never forget. The sun hung low over the dusty horizon of Marlow, Texas, painting the sky a bruised shade of purple and gold. Elena Monroe adjusted her blazer nervously as she stood outside the towering concrete fortress of Blackridge Federal Penitentiary, her stomach churning with a mix of fear and curiosity. Today wasn't supposed to be extraordinary. It was supposed to be another quiet day cataloging inmate files and assisting with parole interviews. The kind of work no one wanted, but that suited Elena's quiet nature just fine. She had come to Blackridge not out of ambition, but necessity. Her mother, Martha Monroe, was sick in a way that bills piled higher than prayers. Elena needed the steady paycheck, no matter how heavy the air felt around the prison walls. Inside the administrative wing, Warden Calloway, a gruff, heavy-set man whose voice rumbled like distant thunder, called her into his office. "Monroe," he said without looking up from his paperwork, "you're on interview duty tomorrow. Special case. Silas Kane." The room seemed to tilt. Everyone at Blackridge knew Silas Kane's name. The man wasn't just infamous. He was a legend of nightmares. Convicted for multiple murders, suspected of many more, and rumored to have ties to a sprawling network of corruption, Kane had sat in solitary for 15 years. No one interviewed him. No one even spoke about him unless absolutely necessary. I think there's been a mistake," Elena stammered. Calloway's eyes finally met hers, hard as gravel. "Ain't no mistake. He asked for you." That night, unable to sleep, Elena wandered into the restricted archives under the pretense of organizing old records. The flickering fluorescent lights above buzzed ominously as she searched for any mention of Silas Kane. Hidden between dusty folders, she found it. A letter, aged and brittle, written in looping, deliberate handwriting. Her heart skipped as she read the first line. "To my daughter, whom they kept from me." The signature at the bottom chilled her to her core. Silas Kane. Her hands trembled, and for a moment, she thought she might faint. A daughter? Could it possibly mean her? She read the letter again and again, noting the date. 24 years ago, the same year her mother had suddenly left Austin without explanation, the same year she was born. Questions swirled violently in her mind. Her mother had told her nothing about her father, only that he had died long ago, before you could know him. But now, doubt gnawed at her. Was it possible her mother had hidden the truth, that her father had been alive all this time, rotting away in Blackridge under another name? The weight of the revelation pressed on her chest. But there was no time to crumble. Tomorrow, she would face the man who might have given her life, or stolen countless others. As Elena folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket, a strange sensation prickled at the back of her neck, the feeling of eyes watching her from the shadows. She spun around, but the room was empty, save for the whispering hum of the fluorescent lights. She didn't know it yet, but by opening that letter, Elena had already crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Tomorrow, her life would change forever, and somewhere deep within Blackridge's darkest cell, Silas Kane was waiting. Morning at Blackridge came not with the warmth of sunrise, but with the clang of steel gates and the hollow shuffle of heavy boots against concrete. Elena Monroe sat stiffly in the waiting room outside the interview chamber, the letter from Silas Kane burning against her ribs through her blouse. It felt like a brand, a secret so heavy that it bent her spine with its invisible weight. No one smiled at Blackridge, least of all today. The guards escorted her to a dim, cramped room, a thick glass panel separating her from the man she had agreed to meet. Silas Kane sat there already, shackled at wrists and ankles, his orange jumpsuit stark against the dingy gray of the room. His face was older, more weathered than any photo she had seen, yet his piercing blue eyes that mirrored her own, locked onto her with unsettling familiarity. "Elena," he said, his voice a low rasp, "you look just like her." Before she could speak, a loud buzz signaled the end of their allotted hour, even though it had barely begun. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Session terminated. Escort the inmate back to solitary." Silas's chains clinked as the guards yanked him up, but not before he leaned forward and whispered through the tiny speaker. They lied to you. Find the farmhouse. Look for the black door. His words sank deep, confusing and terrifying all at once. In the days that followed, Elena tried to bury herself in her routines, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Conversations with her mother became strained, hollow, as if every word was a battle to keep the dam of secrets from breaking. You're working too hard, darling, Martha would say, forcing a tired smile over cups of chamomile tea. You should quit that place. Nothing good comes from digging around in the past. But it wasn't just her mother's evasiveness. It was the cold glances from her Uncle Ray, the awkward silences from Aunt Marlene, the way family friends who once greeted her warmly now lowered their gazes when she entered a room. Everyone was hiding something. One rainy evening, after another tense dinner where not a word of her father's name could be spoken, Elena stood by the kitchen window and stared out into the endless Texas fields. Her reflection wavered in the glass, distorted by rivulets of rain. She realized then, with a sick twist in her gut, that she was utterly alone. There was no one she could trust, not anymore. And then it happened. A small envelope slid under the front door. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a photograph, grainy and yellowed with age. It showed a young Martha Monroe, laughing, standing beside a tall man whose face was scratched out in black ink. Behind them loomed an old farmhouse, its door painted black like a gaping mouth. On the back of the photo, a single sentence, "You already know where to look." Elena pressed the photo to her chest, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. Every certainty she once held about her life crumbled like dust in her hands. Late that night, when the house fell silent and her mother's breathing turned to the soft wheeze of sleep, Elena slipped out into the storm. She tucked the photo safely into her jacket and started the engine of her battered Ford pickup. There was a place she needed to find, a truth buried so deep, her own blood had been spilled to protect it. As she drove into the howling night, lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the endless rows of black fields ahead. She didn't know it yet, but the farmhouse wasn't just a place from her mother's past. It was a place of horrors, and the black door was waiting for her to open it. The tires of Elena's old Ford kicked up sprays of mud as she sped down the winding country road, the storm snarling all around her like a living thing. Her headlights barely cut through the dense sheets of rain, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't. Somewhere beyond the fields, buried under years of lies and silence, was the farmhouse, and the answers that gnawed at her very soul. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as the memory of Silas Kane's voice echoed in her mind. Find the farmhouse. Look for the black door. The road finally broke into a clearing. There it was. The farmhouse stood abandoned under the angry sky, its roof sagging, windows shattered, and weeds strangling the porch columns. But there it was, the black door, looming at the front like a scar. Elena stepped out into the rain, pulling her jacket tight around her. Every step toward the house felt heavier, the air colder. It was as if the earth itself resisted her presence. She climbed the creaking steps and reached out with a trembling hand to touch the door. Before she could turn the handle, a voice behind her cut through the storm. You shouldn't be here. She spun around to find an old man standing near the tree line, half hidden by shadows. He wore a battered raincoat and held a lantern that flickered wildly in the wind. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, his eyes sharp despite his years. Who are you? Elena demanded. The old man hesitated, then stepped closer. Name's Harold Boone. Used to watch this place for them. For who? He looked toward the house, his jaw tight. Your family. The words struck her like a blow. I don't understand, Elena said, voice shaking. What does this house have to do with me? Harold Boone lowered his lantern, casting long, eerie shadows across the porch. This place belonged to your grandfather. Before the accident. Before everything went wrong. The black door. That's not just paint, Missy. It's a warning. A bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the house in stark, ghostly light. Elena glanced at the door again, at the way it seemed almost to pulse in the storm. What's behind it? She asked. Harold shook his head slowly. Pain. Secrets. Things that shouldn't ever come back to light. For a moment, Elena considered turning back. She could go home, pretend none of this was real. But then she thought of the letter, of Silas Kane shackled behind glass, of the photo slipped under her door. She couldn't run anymore. Elena pushed open the black door. The hinges screamed in protest as it swung inward. revealing a dark hallway filled with the sour smell of rot and something else, something metallic and sharp. She stepped inside, Harold Boone calling after her, but his voice faded into the howl of the storm. Inside, the house was a mausoleum of forgotten lives. Dust choked the air. Family portraits hung askew, faces blurred by mildew. Furniture was overturned as if someone had fled in terror. And there, at the end of the hall, a spiral staircase descended into the earth. The black door hadn't been the end. It was just the beginning. Elena's heart thundered in her chest as she crept toward the staircase. On the floor near the opening, she noticed something glinting in the dim light, a silver locket, tarnished with age. She picked it up carefully, wiping away years of grime. Inside was a picture of a young woman, her mother, and next to her, a man whose face was familiar in a way that made Elena's blood run cold. It was Silas Kane, smiling in a way that no monster should. She stumbled back, bile rising in her throat. Her mother had known. Her mother had lied. As she stood there, the floorboards groaned under unseen weight. A cold breath stirred the dust. She was not alone. Downstairs, something moved. The black door had been opened, and now there was no going back. The spiral staircase groaned under Elena's weight as she descended, each step vanishing into a darkness so thick it felt almost solid. The storm above raged against the farmhouse, rattling broken windows and howling through unseen cracks. Still, it was the silence below that chilled her more, an unnatural stillness that pressed against her skin like ice. At the bottom of the stairs, she found herself in a small basement. The walls were lined with rusted shelving units, some holding broken toys, dusty books, and boxes sealed with rotting tape. In the center of the room sat a single chair bolted to the floor, with heavy iron cuffs dangling from its arms. Elena's stomach twisted. She turned to leave, the silver locket still clutched in her hand, when she heard the floorboards above her creak again. She wasn't alone. "Elena," a voice called out softly, deceptively sweet. "You shouldn't have come here." Elena froze. Down the staircase came her cousin, Caleb Monroe, the boy who had once teased her at family picnics, who had laughed too hard when she fell from trees, who had always seemed to watch her a little too closely. Now a man, Caleb's face was sharp, predatory, and twisted into a smile that sent a shudder down her spine. "I figured you'd show up eventually," he said, stepping into the dim light. "You always were too curious for your own good." Elena backed away, her mind racing. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged lazily, keeping an eye on family business, making sure certain truths stay buried where they belong. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear herself think. "You knew about this place, about Silas, about everything." Caleb's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We all know, Elena. It's not our fault you were the only one dumb enough to poke around." She glanced toward the staircase, but Caleb caught her look. "Don't bother," he said, pulling a heavy revolver from the waistband of his jeans and letting it dangle casually at his side. "You're not leaving until we have a little chat." Elena swallowed hard, fighting to keep the fear from showing on her face. She needed to think, to stall him, to find a way out. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "Why the black door?" Caleb chuckled darkly. "It's where he kept them, his little projects. Silas wasn't working alone back then. Grandpa was just as sick. They built this room together. A family legacy, you could say." Elena's knees weakened, but she forced herself to stay standing. "Grandpa?" she whispered. Caleb stepped closer, twirling the revolver like a toy. "The Monroe name. It's stained darker than you can imagine, but we kept it clean. We buried the past. We moved on. And Silas?" she rasped. Caleb's face twisted into something cruel. "Silas took the fall. Convenient, wasn't it? Left the rest of us free to live nice, pretty lives." Elena's mind reeled. Everything, every birthday party, every Sunday dinner, every polite smile, had been built on a graveyard of secrets. "But now," Caleb said, stepping within arm's reach, "you're messing it all up." Lightning flashed again, and for a split second, Elena saw the madness dancing in Caleb's eyes. She had to act fast. Without thinking, she hurled the silver locket at his face. Caleb flinched instinctively, and in that heartbeat of distraction, Elena dashed past him, scrambling up the staircase. His furious shout chased her through the house. She burst through the black door into the storm, her feet slipping in the mud as she ran for her truck. Behind her, Caleb's footsteps pounded against the wooden porch, growing closer. Her hands fumbled with the keys, slick with rain and fear. Caleb's shadow loomed in the driver's side mirror. At the last second, the engine roared to life, and she peeled away, gravel spraying behind her. In the mirror, she saw Caleb standing at the edge of the clearing, the revolver hanging loosely at his side, a smirk still etched into his cruel face. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As she sped back toward town, heart hammering in her chest, Elena knew she couldn't run anymore. Caleb wasn't the only one hiding things. Her own mother, her entire family, they had built walls of lies around her entire life, and now, those walls were cracking. At the bottom of her jacket pocket, Elena felt the locket press against her. She pulled it out and noticed something she hadn't before. Etched faintly into the inside cover, almost invisible to the eye, was a date. August 13th, 1978. The night her real father had disappeared. The night her family had become something else. The rain hadn't let up by the time Elena screeched into the driveway of her small rental house on the outskirts of Havenbrook. The porch light flickered weakly, a dim star against the black sky. She stumbled inside, locking the door behind her, pressing her forehead against the cool wood as she tried to catch her breath. She was shaking, not from the cold, but from everything Caleb had revealed, and everything he hadn't. Still clutching the locket, Elena dropped into the armchair by the window, her mind racing. August 13th, 1978. That date meant something deep, a night carved out of her family's history like a wound. She lit a small lamp and turned the locket over in her hands again and again. On impulse, she pried gently at the edge with a butter knife. With a soft click, the locket popped open wider than before. Inside, hidden behind the faded photograph of a laughing baby, a baby she now realized must be herself, was a tiny folded scrap of paper. Hands trembling, Elena pulled it free and unfolded it. It was a photograph, old, grainy, torn at the edges. It showed two men standing side by side in front of a nondescript brick building. One of the men she recognized immediately, her grandfather, James Monroe, looking much younger, but still bearing that same hard, cold stare. The other man was Silas Crane. Her blood ran cold. On the back of the photo, scrawled in faded ink, was an address, 217 Willow Creek Lane, and a single word underneath, storage. Elena stared at it for a long moment, the storm outside rumbling like a living thing. Something hidden, something left behind. She knew Willow Creek Lane. It was near the abandoned industrial district, a part of town that everyone pretended didn't exist, a cluster of crumbling warehouses and forgotten streets, where bad things had always seemed to happen. She tucked the locket and the photo into her jacket pocket, her resolve hardening. She needed answers, and they wouldn't come from the cowards sitting around her family's dinner tables, pretending that everything was fine. As she headed toward the door, her phone buzzed violently on the coffee table. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, Elena. Last warning." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She didn't have time to wonder who had sent it. She grabbed her keys and rushed out into the storm. The drive to Willow Creek Lane felt endless. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every pair of headlights behind her made her pulse jump. But she made it. The address led her to a sagging, corrugated steel warehouse, half swallowed by weeds and time. Its front gate hung crookedly on broken hinges. She squeezed through, her flashlight slicing weakly through the heavy mist. The place smelled of rust and rot. She found the storage locker tucked in the far back. Number 13, of course. The padlock was old but not difficult to break with a rock she found nearby. The heavy door screeched open, revealing rows of battered furniture, old wooden crates, and the thick, suffocating scent of mold. She stepped inside, heart pounding, and there, in the center of the room, covered by a dusty tarp, was something that made her breath catch. An old, battered chest, the kind you only saw in history books. Faded initials were burned into the wood. S.C. Silas Crane. Elena's fingers hovered over the latch. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, some deep, primal instinct warning her that once she opened this box, she could never unsee what lay inside. But she had come too far to turn back now. She flipped the latch. The chest creaked open. Inside, she found a bundle of documents wrapped carefully in waxed cloth, photographs, letters, notebooks. At the very top sat a faded journal, its leather cover cracked with age. She opened it, and her world tilted. The journal wasn't Silas's. It was James Monroe's, her grandfather's. The first page held just a single line, written in a trembling, guilty hand. "We made monsters together, and only one of us went to prison." Elena's hands shook as she turned the pages. reading lists of names, dates, places, details of horrific things done not just by Silas, but orchestrated by James himself, and, chillingly, hints that more members of the family were involved. The truth hit her like a freight train. Silas wasn't the lone madman everyone painted him to be. He was the fall guy for a whole network of evil, a network with her family's blood at its core. She stumbled back, nearly dropping the journal, when a noise snapped her attention toward the door. Footsteps. Someone was here, coming closer. She wasn't alone. The chest gaped open in the stale air, its dark secrets spilling into Elena's heart like a poison. She snapped the journal closed, clutching it to her chest, and backed toward the wall, listening. Footsteps echoed against the concrete. Slow, deliberate. She turned off her flashlight in a panic, plunging the storage unit into near darkness. Her breathing sounded deafening in the small space. "Elena," a low voice called out. "I'm not here to hurt you." She recognized that voice, hoarse, heavy with exhaustion. Caleb. Slowly, she edged toward the entrance, the journal hidden behind her back. A figure stepped into the frame of the door. Rainwater dripped from the brim of Caleb's worn baseball cap. He held his hands up, palms facing her, like trying to soothe a frightened animal. "I figured you'd come here," he said softly. "I warned you it wasn't safe to dig." Elena's mind raced. Was he the one who sent the text? Was he working against her this whole time? "How did you know about this place?" she demanded, voice shaking. Caleb hesitated. Lightning flashed across the sky behind him, casting his face into sharp relief, lined. "Tired, burdened with secrets. I knew your grandfather," he said. "More than you think. And I know what he was mixed up in. You shouldn't be alone in this." Elena pressed herself tighter against the wall. "Why should I trust you?" A sad, broken smile crossed Caleb's face. "Because you don't have anyone else who's telling you the truth." He stepped closer, his voice urgent but low. "They'll come after you now. Elena, they can't risk you exposing what you found. Your family isn't just hiding skeletons. They're protecting monsters." Elena tightened her grip on the journal, her pulse roaring in her ears. Caleb seemed to notice. "Whatever's in that journal," he whispered, "is the key. But it's also a death sentence if the wrong people find out you have it." The storm raged outside, and inside, Elena felt another storm brewing. Doubt, fear, anger. "Why are you helping me?" she said, almost pleading. "What's in it for you?" Caleb's shoulders sagged, as if the weight of years bore down on him. "Silas Crane," he said, barely audible, "was my brother." The words hit her like a slap. Her knees nearly buckled. "That's not possible," she gasped. "He wasn't always a monster," Caleb said, pain thick in his voice. "He was made into one. By your grandfather. By others. I couldn't save him. But maybe I can help you survive what's coming." Elena staggered, her mind reeling. Could she really believe him? Was it even crazier to trust her own family, knowing what she knew now? A deep rumble sounded outside, a car engine pulling up fast. Caleb cursed under his breath. "Too late." He grabbed her wrist. "We have to go. Now." Against every screaming instinct inside her, Elena let him pull her through the darkened maze of the storage yard. They ducked behind rusted machinery and broken crates as a black SUV skidded to a stop in front of Unit 13. Men poured out, faceless in the rain, wearing dark coats, moving with terrifying precision. They knew exactly what they were looking for. "They're not here to talk," Caleb hissed. "They're here to bury the past, and anyone who knows too much." Heart hammering, Elena clutched the journal tighter and followed Caleb into the storm, knowing she had just made a choice that would either save her or destroy her. The rain lashed down in furious sheets as Caleb's old truck barreled down the back roads, the headlights slicing through the misty darkness. Elena huddled against the window, the journal clutched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles ached. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The fear, the betrayal, it coiled inside her like a living thing. Caleb drove in grim silence, his jaw clenched, his hands tight on the wheel. Finally, he pulled off the main road onto a muddy path lined by looming trees. The truck bounced and jolted until they came to a battered cabin half swallowed by overgrown weeds. "We'll be safe here," Caleb muttered. "For now." Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and dust. Caleb stoked a dying fire into a glow and tossed Elena a threadbare blanket. "You need to warm up. We'll talk after." Elena nodded numbly, her mind racing ahead. She didn't trust Caleb, not fully, but every instinct screamed that she couldn't go back to her family. Not now. Not ever. Later that night, While Caleb slept in a chair by the fire, Elena crept into a corner with the journal. She flipped carefully through the pages, scanning the entries, dates, locations, names. She gasped as she recognized some of the names: politicians, business owners, even law enforcement officials from towns across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Each one was linked to something called the Ashwood Pact. Elena's fingers trembled as she pieced it together. Her grandfather, along with these men, had been part of a secret society that buried their crimes, and sometimes their victims, under a veneer of respectability. And Silas Crane had been their enforcer, until he broke, until he became something worse. Tears filled Elena's eyes. Her family hadn't just turned a blind eye to evil, they had built it. A sudden noise outside snapped her head up. A branch snapped. Footsteps squelched in the mud. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Caleb stirred, his hand reaching instinctively for the hunting rifle propped against the wall. "They found us," he whispered. Without thinking, Elena stuffed the journal inside her jacket and scrambled toward the back door. Caleb followed, rifle ready. Through the trees, they saw them, flashlights bobbing, voices barking orders. "They're splitting up," Caleb hissed. "They'll corner us if we don't move now." With no time to think, they darted into the woods, mud sucking at their boots. Elena's lungs burned as she ran, heart pounding in terror. Half blind in the darkness, she tripped over something. A heavy metal ring embedded in the ground, hidden under moss and fallen leaves. Caleb yanked her up, but she tugged at his sleeve. "Wait," she gasped. "Look." They cleared away the leaves, revealing a rusted trapdoor. Without a second thought, they pulled it open and slipped inside, just as a flashlight beam swept past the clearing. Inside, the air was damp and thick with the smell of earth and decay. Their feet echoed on old stone steps leading down, down, into the forgotten bowels of the land. What they found stunned them both into silence. Rows of old filing cabinets, yellowed photographs, brittle newspapers, an entire archive hidden underground. "This," Caleb muttered, wide-eyed, "this is where they kept their sins." Elena moved deeper, her hands shaking, and began pulling open drawers. Documents detailing illegal experiments, property seizures, even cold case files of missing people, all tied back to the Ashwood Pact, including one file with her mother's name on it. Frozen in horror, Elena realized. Her mother's death hadn't been an accident. It had been engineered. Footsteps echoed overhead. They were still being hunted. But now Elena had more than just the journal. She had enough evidence to burn the entire Ashwood Pact to the ground, if she could survive long enough to expose it. As she stuffed as much as she could into a battered duffel bag, Caleb grabbed her arm, his face grim. "They'll never let you leave with that," he said. "Are you ready to risk everything?" Elena stared at the ancient files in her arms, proof of horrors untold, and nodded fiercely. "I have to." Above them, the trapdoor creaked open. The trapdoor above groaned, dust raining down like ash. Caleb yanked Elena behind a row of rusted filing cabinets as heavy boots thudded on the floorboards above. Whispers, commands barked in clipped, urgent tones. Elena clutched the duffel bag tighter, her body trembling not just from fear, but from the seething fury rising inside her. The truth she now carried was heavier than anything she could have imagined. Her mother hadn't died by accident. Her family hadn't just lied. They had killed. She pressed her forehead against the cold metal of the cabinet, struggling to steady her breath. She couldn't run forever. It was time to confront them. When the footsteps faded, Caleb motioned to her. "We need to move. Now." But Elena shook her head. "No more running." Caleb's eyes widened. "Elena, they will destroy you." "Then let them try," she whispered, her voice shaking with the raw edge of a lifetime of betrayal. The next evening, Elena stood on the front porch of her family home, the grand, white-columned house that now seemed like a mausoleum of lies. Thunder rumbled low in the distance as she raised her fist and knocked. The door creaked open. There stood her Uncle Charles, the new patriarch after her grandfather's death, his face a mask of polite surprise that quickly curdled into suspicion. "Elena," he said, smiling tightly. "We've been so worried." She pushed past him without a word. Inside, the house was exactly as she remembered. Polished floors, heavy oil paintings of ancestors who had looked just as cold and cruel as the living family members she now faced. Her Aunt Margaret, Cousin Lydia, even her own brother Thomas sat waiting in the sitting room, their faces a gallery of false concern. "Elena, darling, where have you been?" Margaret cooed, her voice dripping with poison. Elena dropped the duffel bag onto the floor with a heavy thud. Papers and photographs spilled out like the contents of Pandora's box. Silence fell like a guillotine. Charles's face drained of color. Thomas shifted uneasily. Lydia's eyes flickered with something between fear and fury. "You knew," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper but cutting like a blade. "You knew what grandfather did. What you all did." Margaret rose, her smile fading into a cold grimace. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Elena snapped. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to blink. "You murdered her. You murdered my mother because she wanted out, because she threatened to expose you." Thomas stood, fists clenched. "You have no proof." Elena picked up a handful of documents and hurled them across the coffee table. Newspaper clippings, signed orders, photos, proof. Margaret's face twisted into a snarl. "You think you can ruin generations of work because you're angry? Because you're weak?" Elena stared at them, these people who were her blood, and felt nothing but disgust. "You think this is strength?" she said, her voice rising. "Hiding behind money and lies and murder?" Charles stepped forward, his face darkening. "If you expose us, you expose yourself. You're a Crane, Elena. You're one of us whether you like it or not." The words hit her like a slap. The final trap, loyalty to monsters or destruction. For a moment she faltered. Then she straightened her shoulders. "I'd rather burn everything down," she said. Charles's expression turned savage. "We can make you disappear, just like we made her disappear." Before she could react, Thomas lunged. Caleb burst through the door with a roar, rifle raised. "Back off!" he bellowed. The room exploded into chaos. Elena dove for the duffel bag, Caleb covering her as Charles shouted for the guards. Bullets shattered the windows. Plaster rained from the ceiling. Elena and Caleb fought their way out, the duffel swinging from her shoulder, adrenaline screaming through her veins. They tore through the night, blood pounding in their ears, gunfire echoing behind them. As they vanished into the darkness, Elena realized she had declared war on her own blood, and there was no turning back. She had exposed the first cracks in the house of lies, but the real battle was just beginning. They didn't stop running until the first gray light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the world in muted sorrow. Elena collapsed onto the cracked bench of an abandoned bus stop miles away from town, her chest heaving, her mind racing. Caleb sat beside her, his face hollow and worn. The duffel bag lay at her feet, heavy not just with evidence, but with generations of cruelty and betrayal. For a long time, they said nothing. Finally, Caleb spoke, his voice rough. "What now?" Elena stared into the rising sun, feeling the cold steel of the family's sins in her bones. "I end it," she said simply. By noon, Elena stood at the gates of the county sheriff's department, a battered building with peeling paint and a cracked American flag fluttering limply on the pole. Every instinct in her screamed to run. She knew what her family was capable of, but then she thought of her mother's smile, of the life stolen from her, of the children who might still suffer if she stayed silent. She tightened her grip on the duffel bag and pushed the door open. Sheriff Whitmore, an older man with a tired face and kind eyes, looked up from his desk. He didn't recognize her at first. Not in her worn clothes, not with the fire burning behind her tired eyes. "I need to report a crime," Elena said. He leaned back, eyeing her carefully. "What kind of crime, ma'am?" "The kind that destroys families," she said. "The kind that's been hidden for decades." She dropped the duffel on the desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. For a long moment, Whitmore said nothing. Then he opened the bag, and the world changed. Within days, the Crane family's empire of secrets began to crumble. The media descended like vultures on the once proud estate. Newscasters whispered about conspiracy, corruption, and unsolved murders. Elena watched from a small motel room miles away as her family's crimes were splashed across every television screen in America. Charles Crane was arrested at dawn, dragged from the house in handcuffs, his face twisted in rage and humiliation. Margaret sobbed hysterically for the cameras, denying everything. Thomas disappeared, a fugitive on the run. The town buzzed with shock and betrayal. The Cranes had been pillars of the community. Now they were pariahs. Caleb came to her door one rainy evening, carrying 2 coffees and a small, battered envelope. "This came for you," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a letter, from her mother, written years ago, hidden away, a desperate cry for Elena to someday find the truth. Tears blurred her vision as she read the shaky handwriting. "You are stronger than they are, my sweet girl. If you ever feel lost, Follow the light inside you. Don't let the darkness win. I love you. Always." Elena pressed the letter to her heart, sobbing until her whole body ached. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to mourn, and then she allowed herself to hope. Months later, Elena stood alone on the cracked remains of the Crane estate. The house had been seized by the government, stripped bare, abandoned to rot. She held the object that had started it all, the small, tarnished key her mother had hidden in the floorboards all those years ago, the key to the truth, and now, a symbol of her freedom. With a deep, shuddering breath, she tossed the key into the ashes of the ruined house. The past no longer chained her. She turned away, walking into the sunlight, leaving behind not just the Crane name, but the legacy of fear, cruelty, and silence. Her story wasn't one of bloodlines anymore. It was one of survival, of choosing to build rather than destroy, of finding strength in the wreckage and daring to begin again.